The darkness wrapped around me instantly, thick and suffocating, the only light coming from that small, blinking red dot on the recorder somewhere behind me. My heart slammed against my ribs so violently it felt like it was trying to escape my body. I turned slowly, forcing myself to breathe, forcing my legs not to collapse beneath me. And then I saw him, my husband, standing at the top of the stairs, blocking the faint glow from the hallway, his face half hidden in shadow, his posture relaxed, almost gentle, as if this was an ordinary conversation and not the moment my life split into before and after. He said my name softly, the way he used to when we were dating, when everything felt safe and warm and familiar, and that familiarity terrified me more than anger ever could. I asked him what this was, what he had done, why there were pictures of us, why our son was afraid of him. My voice sounded distant, like it belonged to someone else. He smiled, not wide, not cruel, just calm, and he said, "I was never supposed to find out like this." He stepped down one stair, then another, his footsteps slow, deliberate, each one echoing through the basement like a countdown. I backed away until my legs hit the cold edge of the table. My hands brushed against the photographs, and I flinched as if they burned. He told me he had been chosen, that some people are born with the ability to hear what others cannot, to see what lies just beneath the surface of reality. He said most people ignore it, drown it out with noise and lies, but he embraced it, listened to it, fed it. I thought of our son then, the way he covered his ears at night, the way he cried without knowing why, and I understood something terrible, that whatever my husband was hearing, whatever he was inviting into our home, it had noticed our child too. My husband spoke of protection, of sacrifice, of keeping our family safe in a world full of rot and corruption. He said the voices promised him guidance, power, purpose if he followed their rules, if he gave them what they wanted. I asked him what they wanted, even though every part of me screamed that I didn't want to know. His eyes flicked toward the photographs, then toward the recorder, and he said truth. He said blood. He said devotion. My legs trembled. I felt the room closing in. The symbols on the walls seemed to pulse under the flickering light. I noticed then the stains on the floor, darker than the rest, soaked deep into the concrete. I thought of nights he said he was working late, of the unexplained absences, the locked doors, the secrecy. And I felt sick, realizing how blind I had been, how love can turn into a blindfold without you noticing. He reached for my hand, gently, and I pulled away, my back pressed against the wall. I asked him where our son was, my voice breaking for the first time. He tilted his head, listening to something I couldn't hear, then smiled again and said, "Sleeping peacefully upstairs." The voices liked children, he said. They were closer to the other side, still untouched, still open, but he promised he would never hurt him, not unless he had to. That word, unless, echoed in my head like a gunshot. I knew then I couldn't reason with him, couldn't appeal to the man he used to be, because that man was gone, replaced by someone who believed his madness was holy. I glanced toward the stairs, calculating distance, thinking of escape, but he saw it in my eyes and shook his head sadly, telling me the door was locked from the outside now, that no one could interrupt what needed to happen. He picked up one of the photographs, the one taken from our bedroom window while we slept, and asked me if I remembered the night it was taken. I didn't, but he did. He remembered every detail. The time the whispers were strongest, the night the voices first said my name with approval instead of hunger. I asked him what he was planning to do with me, my voice barely a whisper, and he said he needed me to listen, too. He needed me to understand, because understanding was the first step to acceptance. He turned on the recorder fully, and suddenly the basement filled with sound, layered, distorted voices overlapping, chanting, murmuring my name, our son's name, words in a language that clawed at my ears, making my head spin. I dropped to my knees, covering my ears, but it didn't help. The sound wasn't just noise, it was pressure, memories, emotions, images flooding my mind. I saw things, places I had never been, symbols forming shapes that felt ancient and alive. I felt watched, judged, weighed, like my soul was being measured. Through it all, my husband's voice stayed calm, guiding me, telling me to breathe, to open myself to it, to stop resisting. He said this was the future he had been preparing for, a family chosen, set apart, elevated above the rest. I screamed for him to stop, but my voice was swallowed by the sound. And then, suddenly, it all cut off. Silence crashing down so hard it rang in my ears. I looked up, gasping, and saw him staring at me with something like disappointment. He said I wasn't ready yet, that fear still ruled me, but it was only a matter of time because once the voices know you, they never let go. He helped me to my feet, his grip firm, not painful, but impossible to escape, and led us back up the stairs, opening the door just enough to let us through, then locking it again behind us. The normal house lights felt wrong, too bright, too fake, like a stage set. I was led to the living room where our son slept, curled up on the couch, clutching his favorite blanket, unaware of how close everything was to falling apart. My husband knelt beside him, brushing hair from his forehead with a tenderness that broke my heart. He whispered that he would always protect him, that this was all for him. Then he looked at me and said we would talk more tomorrow, that I needed rest, time to process, because the next step required trust. That night, I lay awake, staring into the darkness, listening to my son's breathing, memorizing the sound, terrified of what the morning would bring. I understood then that the warning my little son gave me was not just about his father, it was about the future. About a choice I would be forced to make, one that would demand everything from me. And as the house creaked softly around us, I realized the worst part wasn't what I had seen in the basement, but what I knew was coming next. I still remember the way his voice sounded that afternoon, soft and careful, like he was afraid the air itself might hear him. We were sitting on the living room floor, building a crooked tower of blocks. The sunlight was coming through the window, making everything look peaceful, safe, normal. And then my little son looked up at me with those wide, serious eyes that never knew how to lie. And he said, "Mommy, I need to tell you something about Daddy." And in that moment, something inside me tightened, not because of what he said, but because of how he said it. Children say strange things all the time, but this was different. There was weight in his voice, like he was carrying something too heavy for his small chest to hold. I smiled at him, the way mothers do when they want to protect their children from their own fears, and I brushed his hair back, telling him, "Daddy loves you. Daddy just works a lot, you know that." But he shook his head slowly, his fingers clenching around a blue block, and he whispered, "No, Mommy, you don't know. He told me not to tell you." That was when my heart skipped, because secrets don't belong in the mouths of children, especially secrets that come with fear. I asked him what he meant, trying to keep my voice calm, smooth, like everything was fine, like the world had not just shifted slightly off its axis. He hesitated, then leaned closer to me, his breath warm against my cheek, and said, "Daddy gets scary at night. He watches things and talks to people who aren't there, and he goes into the basement and locks the door and says bad words about you." The room felt suddenly colder. I laughed softly because that is what you do when your mind refuses to accept what your ears have just heard. I told him, "Daddy probably watches silly movies or talks on the phone," but my son shook his head again, harder this time, his eyes filling with tears. He said, "No, Mommy, he talks to the walls, and he told me that if you ever see what's in the basement, you would go away forever." Those words stayed with me, echoing long after he went back to stacking his blocks, as if he had not just cracked open my sense of safety. I told myself it was imagination. Children blend dreams and reality all the time. My husband had always been quiet, intense, maybe a little distant, but never dangerous, never someone I would fear. I had loved him for years, trusted him with my life, with our child, with our home. That night, I watched my husband more closely than ever before. The way he ate in silence, the way his jaw tightened when I spoke, the way he avoided my eyes. He kissed our son goodnight and lingered in the doorway longer than usual, watching him sleep like he was memorizing something. And when he thought I wasn't looking, he slipped the basement key from the kitchen drawer and closed his fist around it. I followed him with my eyes as he walked down the hallway, his footsteps heavy, deliberate. The basement door creaked open and then closed with a dull, final thud. And then silence. Not the normal quiet of a house settling, but a thick, unnatural stillness, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. I lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, listening for sounds, telling myself I was being ridiculous, overreacting to a child's story. But then I heard it, a low murmur rising from beneath the floor, voices overlapping, whispers and words I couldn't quite make out. My heart pounded so hard, I was sure it would wake my son. I slipped out of bed, barefoot, moving slowly down the hallway until I stood at the top of the basement stairs. The light under the door was on, casting a thin line across the floor. I pressed my ear against the wood, and that's when I heard my name. Not spoken gently, not spoken with love, but with anger, with something dark underneath it. My husband's voice sounded different, deeper, colder, like someone else was speaking through him. And then there were other sounds too, metallic clinking, scraping, a low rhythmic thump that made my stomach twist. I backed away quietly, returning to bed, my mind racing, images flashing through my head. I barely slept. When morning came, my husband acted normal, cheerful even. He made breakfast, kissed my forehead, asked about my day, as if nothing had happened, as if my world had not been cracked open overnight. Days passed, and my son grew quieter, flinching at sudden noises, clinging to me when his father walked into the room. Once, when my husband reached out to lift him, he recoiled instinctively, and that broke something inside me. I began to notice things I had ignored before. Locked drawers, unexplained bruises on my husband's arms, long sleeves even in the heat, the way the basement key never left his pocket. One afternoon, my son tugged on my sleeve, his face pale, his voice trembling. He said, "Mommy, please don't go into the basement. Daddy says bad things live there, and they don't like mommies who ask questions." I knelt down, holding his face in my hands, asking him what he meant, but tears spilled down his cheeks, and he said, "I already said too much." That was when fear stopped being a whisper and became a scream inside my chest. I waited until my husband left for work that evening. The house felt different without him, lighter but heavier at the same time, like the truth was pressing down on me. I stood in front of the basement door, staring at it for a long time, my hand hovering over the knob, knowing that once I opened it, nothing would ever be the same. The door was locked, of course, but I knew where he hid the spare key, behind the toolbox in the garage. My fingers shook as I grabbed it. Every step back to the door felt like walking toward the edge of a cliff. My son's words echoed in my head, warning me, begging me, but I couldn't ignore it anymore. I owed him the truth, even if it destroyed me. I unlocked the door slowly, the hinges groaning in protest. A wave of cold air rushed up the stairs, carrying a smell that made my stomach churn. Damp metal, old dust, and something else. Something sour and wrong. The room felt suddenly colder. I laughed softly because that is what you do when your mind refuses to accept what your ears have just heard. I told him, "Daddy probably watches silly movies or talks on the phone." But my son shook his head again, harder this time, his eyes filling with tears. He said, "No, Mommy, he talks to the walls, and he told me that if you ever see what's in the basement, you would go away forever." Those words stayed with me, echoing long after he went back to stacking his blocks, as if he had not just cracked open my sense of safety. I told myself it was imagination, children blend dreams and reality all the time. My husband had always been quiet, intense, maybe a little distant, but never dangerous, never someone I would fear. I had loved him for years, trusted him with my life, with our child, with our home. That night, I watched my husband more closely than ever before. The way he ate in silence, the way his jaw tightened when I spoke, the way he avoided my eyes. He kissed our son goodnight and lingered in the doorway longer than usual, watching him sleep like he was memorizing something. And when he thought I wasn't looking, he slipped the basement key from the kitchen drawer and closed his fist around it. I followed him with my eyes as he walked down the hallway, his footsteps heavy, deliberate. The basement door creaked open and then closed with a dull, final thud. And then silence. Not the normal quiet of a house settling, but a thick, unnatural stillness, like the walls themselves were holding their breath. I lay in bed that night staring at the ceiling, listening for sounds, telling myself I was being ridiculous, overreacting to a child's story. But then I heard it. A low murmur rising from beneath the floor, voices overlapping, whispers and words I couldn't quite make out. My heart pounded so hard I was sure it would wake my son. I slipped out of bed, barefoot, moving slowly down the hallway until I stood at the top of the basement stairs. The light under the door was on, casting a thin line across the floor. I pressed my ear against the wood, and that's when I heard my name. Not spoken gently, not spoken with love, but with anger, with something dark underneath it. My husband's voice sounded different, deeper, colder, like someone else was speaking through him. And then there were other sounds too. Metallic clinking, scraping, a low rhythmic thump that made my stomach twist. I backed away quietly, returning to bed, my mind racing, images flashing through my head. I barely slept. When morning came, my husband acted normal, cheerful even. He made breakfast, kissed my forehead, asked about my day, as if nothing had happened, as if my world had not been cracked open overnight. Days passed, and my son grew quieter, flinching at sudden noises, clinging to me when his father walked into the room. Once, when my husband reached out to lift him, he recoiled instinctively, and that broke something inside me. I began to notice things I had ignored before. Locked drawers, unexplained bruises on my husband's arms, long sleeves even in the heat, the way the basement key never left his pocket. One afternoon, my son tugged on my sleeve, his face pale, his voice trembling. He said, "Mommy, please don't go into the basement. Daddy says bad things live there, and they don't like mommies who ask questions." I knelt down, holding his face in my hands, asking him what he meant, but morning came without relief. The light sliding through the curtains felt like an intruder, exposing a truth I wanted to keep buried. I lay still, listening to the house, every creak, every distant sound, wondering if the walls were still listening, if the voices were awake already. My husband moved around the kitchen, humming softly like any normal day, and that normality was the most terrifying part of all. I watched my son sleep, his small chest rising and falling, his face peaceful, innocent, untouched by the weight pressing down on me. And I knew with a clarity that hurt that I could not let this continue. I could not wait for tomorrow or the next step my husband spoke of, because whatever those voices wanted, it was moving closer, and it would not stop on its own. At breakfast, my husband smiled, poured juice, asked my son about his dreams, and my son answered quietly, avoiding his eyes, his little hand finding mine under the table, gripping it tight. My husband noticed, of course. He always noticed things like that. His smile flickered just for a moment, then returned brighter than before. He told me we should take a drive later, clear our heads, spend time together like a family. And I knew then that today was not just another day, it was a deadline. When he left the room to take a call, I leaned down to my son and whispered that we were going to play a special game later, that he needed to do exactly what I said no matter what. His eyes filled with questions, but he nodded because he trusted me completely, and that trust burned inside my chest like fire. I waited until my husband went to the garage, the sound of tools clanking giving me the opening I needed. My heart raced as I grabbed the emergency bag I had packed in secret months ago during sleepless nights when something felt wrong, but I hadn't known why. Clothes, documents, cash, my hands moved on instinct, fueled by fear and love. I scooped my son into my arms and slipped out the back door, my breath coming in shallow bursts as if the air itself was running out. The car keys shook in my hand as I opened the door and strapped my son into his seat, telling him everything was going to be okay, even as my voice trembled. I started the engine and pulled out of the driveway just as the garage door began to rise. I didn't look back. I couldn't, because I knew if I saw his face, I might freeze. We drove with no destination at first, just distance between us and that house, the road blurring through tears. I called the only person I trusted, my sister, my words tumbling out broken, frantic. She told me to come to her place immediately, to keep driving, not to stop. And for the first time since this began, I felt a thin thread of hope. But halfway there, my phone buzzed, his name lighting up the screen over and over again. I didn't answer. I turned it off, my hands sweating on the steering wheel. My son asked if Daddy was mad. I told him Daddy was sick, and sometimes sick people do scary things even when they love you, and he nodded, like he understood more than any child should have to. We reached my sister's house, and she pulled us into her arms without questions, locking the doors, calling the police as I finally let myself collapse. The words spilled out then. Everything. The basement, the voices, the fear, the warnings. My sister listened, her face pale, her eyes hardening with resolve. She promised we were safe now, but even as she said it, I felt the weight of being watched lift only slightly, not gone. The police came, took statements, searched the house, but they didn't find what I had seen. The basement was empty, clean, as if nothing had ever been there. No symbols, no table, no photographs, just bare concrete and shelves of boxes. They exchanged looks, the kind that told me they thought grief, stress, imagination. My husband was gone, his car missing, his phone turned off, and with every hour that passed, the silence grew louder. Days turned into weeks. I filed for protection, moved cities, changed routines. I watched my son slowly begin to laugh again, sleep through the night, but sometimes he would stop suddenly, stare at nothing, and ask if the bad voices could still find us. I told him no, even when I wasn't sure, because children need something solid to hold on to, even if it is just a promise. One night, months later, after I had almost convinced myself it was over, I found the recorder in a box of my son's toys, the same red light blinking softly. My blood ran cold. I didn't remember packing it. I didn't remember seeing it since that night in the basement. My hands shook as I picked it up, afraid to press play, afraid not to. When I did, there were no voices at first, just silence. Then my husband's voice, calm, familiar, telling me he knew I would run, that the voices said I would, but that distance didn't matter because once you hear them, once they are part of you, he said. Our son was special, that he had warned me because he could see what I could not yet see, that this was never about the basement or the house, but about a choice between fear and truth. The recording ended with a sound that made my stomach drop, a child's whisper saying, "Mommy, you should have listened." I smashed the recorder against the floor again and again until it broke into pieces. My son cried, asking what was wrong, and I held him tighter than ever, promising him that nothing would take him from me, that I would protect him from everything, even the things I didn't understand. But late at night, when the house is quiet and the world feels thin, I still hear whispers, not words, just my name carried on the edge of sleep, and I wonder if my son warned me too late or if he was trying to save me from something far worse than his father. And I live every day now knowing that what I saw next was not the end of the story, but the beginning of a fight I can never afford to lose. I thought the whispers would fade with time, that distance would weaken them, that love and routine and sunlight would drown them out. But some things, once heard, never truly leave. They settle deep inside you, waiting for the world to go quiet enough to be noticed again. Life moved forward because it had to. New house, new schools, new names on mailboxes. I learned how to smile again, how to laugh in public, how to pretend I was just another mother carrying groceries, worrying about homework, planning birthdays. But every night before sleep, I checked the doors, the windows, the shadows in the corners of rooms. I listened to the rhythm of my son's breathing like it was a shield, like as long as I could hear it, nothing could touch us. My son grew older, but not the way other children did. There was a seriousness in him, a watchfulness. He noticed things adults missed. Moods, shifts, silences. Sometimes he would stop mid-sentence and tilt his head like he was listening to something far away. And when I asked what he heard, he would smile and say, "Nothing, Mommy, just the house settling." I told myself children change, they adapt, trauma leaves marks, and this was ours. But deep down, I knew there was more. The dreams came back first. Dreams where I was standing in that basement again, except it was endless, stretching on forever. Symbols glowing softly, walls breathing, voices not screaming anymore, just waiting, patient, confident. I woke up with my heart racing and the echo of my name lingering like smoke. Then, one evening, my son came to me as I folded laundry, his face pale but calm, far too calm for what he was about to say. He asked me if I remembered the promise I made the night I broke the recorder, the promise to protect him from everything, even things I didn't understand. I told him, of course I did. I would always keep him safe. He nodded slowly and said, "Then you have to trust me now, because Daddy isn't the one listening anymore." The room felt like it tilted. I asked him what he meant, my voice barely holding together, and he looked at me with those same serious eyes he had as a little boy, the eyes that never lied. He said, "The voices didn't go away when we left. They were looking for someone who could hear them clearly, someone strong enough to carry them without breaking. And when Daddy ran, they followed him for a while, but he was weak, afraid. He tried to control them instead of understanding them." My son told me they came to him instead, not all at once, not loudly, just like whispers between dreams, teaching him, showing him things, warning him, just like he warned me. He said he never wanted them, but they said he was born open, that some people are, and that closing the door completely would hurt more people than listening ever could. I felt the same cold fear I had felt standing at the top of the basement stairs, but this time it was mixed with something worse, recognition. I saw the patterns, the late-night staring, the quiet listening, the way he always seemed to know when something bad was about to happen, how he warned me before storms, accidents, phone calls that changed lives. I wanted to deny it, to pull him into my arms and tell him none of it was real, but he took my hand gently, grounding me like a parent would, and said, "Mommy, don't be scared. I know the difference between bad voices and warning voices. Daddy didn't." I asked him where his father was, my throat tight, and he hesitated just a moment before saying, the voices didn't need him anymore, that he went somewhere quiet, somewhere far, and that I didn't need to look for him because some answers were meant to stay buried. I cried then, silently, because I understood the terrible truth. My son had not only warned me, he had protected me, guided me, chosen me. He was never the victim in this story. He was the gate standing between worlds, far too heavy a role for a child, but one he carried with terrifying grace. That night, as I watched him sleep, I knew my life would never be simple, never normal, but it would be honest. I would stand beside him, teach him love, compassion, restraint, so he would never become what his father had been. I would be his anchor to this world, his reminder of humanity. Sometimes, when the house is quiet, he still whispers back to the dark, not in fear, not in worship, but in warning. And when he does, the shadows retreat, the air feels lighter, and I realize the thing that prepared me for nothing was never what I saw in the basement. It was the moment I understood that my little son didn't just warn me about his dad, he warned the darkness about me.